to our February Lunch and Learn. I'm Amanda. I'm the Coalition's Director of Communications and Marketing. And hopefully you can see my screen. Just to share with you some upcoming events, in 2 weeks, we have our Northern Nevada Town Hall, and this is going to be at the Innovation Center in Reno. This is for members only. It's no cost, but we do ask that if you would like to attend, if you could register, as we do have limited space. This is the first town hall that we're hosting for the year. Just a time for all of our Northern Nevada members to get together, network with each other, hang out with us at the Coalition. We will have some board members there, and just some time to talk about what you're seeing in Northern Nevada, ideas you have. Probably there'll be some focus on policy, which we'll take into conversations this summer. So yes, please join us if you would like to attend. March 27th, we have our March Lunch and Learn, and this is going to be moderated by one of our members, Ruben Brown. Shout out to them. They stepped up to help us prep for our March Lunch and Learn. Topic will be LITEC. And then again, this summer, we have our Northern and Southern Nevada Policy Forums. These are going to be July 25th at the Nugget in Sparks, and then July 30th at the Culinary Academy in Las Vegas. If you attended them in 2022, it's a time for all of us to come together, talk about policy. We'll be talking about possible bills and policies that we can take forward into the 2025 legislative session. Registration should be coming up shortly for that, so keep an eye out. And then, of course, in October, we have our 2024 annual Nevada Housing Conference. This is going to be October 16th and 17th at the Nugget in Sparks. And if you love our conference and are a Coalition member, we would love to have you join our event planning team. We don't have a specific day or time scheduled yet to meet, but I kind of put here a tentative meeting schedule for all of you. Anyone interested, we'll start meeting once a month, twice a month, and then eventually as we get closer to the conference, we will be meeting weekly. It is not a requirement to attend all the meetings, but as you can attend as much as possible. This is just a time for all of us to chat about what we want the conference to look like, who the speakers will be, what the content will look like, and the agenda. So if you would love to get more involved with us, we would love to have you, and you can just shoot me an email. Joanna can provide that if the chat's working. And then lastly, sponsorship. I want to give a shout out again to Ruben Brown, member of the month. They just came on as our first sponsor of the year, so thank you to them. If you would like to join them, our sponsorships are available. We will be sharing the sponsorship packet. Similar to previous years, we have a lot of levels and benefits to choose from. You'll get complimentary conference passes. You'll have the opportunity to provide scholarships. And it's just a great way to be able to help support our work. I know I've mentioned before, but our sponsors play a huge role in the success of our conference. It gets bigger every year, and because of them, we're able to just continue to put on this event, provide great food, great networking, and fun happy hours for all of you. So if you're interested, please reach out, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joanna.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you for helping troubleshoot the chat. And for that awesome music. It makes me feel real upbeat before we start these lunch and learns. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this month's topic, preservation. I'm very happy that we have Joselyn Cousins from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco joining us. I know many of you know Joselyn from her community development work and regional management work here in Nevada, and even some of you may be connected all the way back when she was Vice President of Community Development at United Way. She is a really strong, amazing partner at the Coalition. We're so glad to have her, and she put together an amazing panel for us today on affordable housing preservation and some programs and policies that might help us do this work here in Nevada. So I'll go ahead and let Joselyn take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and so excited to be here again. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joselyn Cousins, as Joanna said, with the San Francisco Fed. I'm excited, very excited to moderate the discussion today focused on housing preservation. This is a focus area for the Community Development Department at the SF Fed. As the team that I sit on and represent, we aim to advance economic resilience and mobility of low-income communities by addressing barriers to economic participation, barriers such as access to quality, stable, and affordable housing. So I want to share a couple of some not fun facts, key facts. And then also I want to share a couple of quotes from the Preservation Housing Trust. They say that a home is where it all begins. They believe that a home is so much more than an address. It's a place of safety, a sense of community, and a feeling of belonging. I know all of you watching today believe the same. So before we get started, I want to share a few key facts from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition's 2023 Preservation Profile for Nevada. It states that we have a shortage of almost 84,000 rental homes affordable and available to extremely low-income renters. 94% of extremely low-income households spend more than half of their income on rent, and over 1,800 publicly supported rental homes with affordability restrictions expire in the next 5 years. This paints a dire picture for Nevada, but there are many leaders in Nevada, many on the line with us today in the public and private sectors, working tirelessly to address this issue. For everyone to have a safe and affordable home, it requires us to preserve and produce more affordable housing while protecting the renters and tenants. We call that the 3 Ps of housing. We must also add the C for capital as well. A shortage of affordable homes for workers and families at all income levels across the country calls for innovative solutions. Today, we'll hear from 2 experts, housing experts, about innovative solutions they are implementing in their communities. So let's get started with our guests. And just a reminder, I think our chat is working, so please add your questions to the chat and we'll address them following the presentations. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, our speakers today. First, we have Julia Duranti-Martínez, Senior Program Officer at Local Initiatives Support Corporation, who'll share a broad look at preservation programs across the country. And Lukas Ridd, Fund Manager at the Utah Housing Preservation Fund, who'll talk a little bit about their nationally recognized model, including best practices, lessons learned, funding, and outcomes. So welcome to our guest today, and so glad to have you with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Julia to get us started.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn. I hope folks can see my screen. And I'm super excited to be here today to talk a little bit about one particularly exciting and powerful preservation tool, which is tenant and community opportunity to purchase policies, and what we can learn too from how a couple cities have implemented TOPA and COPA policies, and implications kind of for standing up larger local preservation ecosystems. So as Jocelyn said, my name is Julia Duranti-Martínez, and I work with LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC is our acronym, with our National Community Research and Impact team. Based in New York City. Just very briefly about LISC, we are one of the largest national community development financial institutions and intermediaries. We do lending, grant making, technical assistance, capacity building, research, convening, facilitation, a lot of different things throughout the country with a network of over 2,000 community-based partners through our 37 local offices and different national programs. So our team, Community Research and Impact, is one of the national teams that supports research as well as program design and implementation and systems change efforts across the LISC network, with a particular focus on community development policies and practices that can advance racial, economic, and gender equity. So that's just a bit about us. We were asked to write this new report on tenant and community purchase policies, sort of in the context of local preservation ecosystems by our colleagues in the Boston, New York, DC, Kansas City, and Bay Area offices, as well as a number of others, because jurisdictions in all of these places have seen a lot of policy interest and local campaigns around COPA and TOPA. So we drew on the experiences of our DC office, where TOPA has now a 44-year history of impact, and where the LISC DC office is one of the TOPA lenders that supports tenant purchases, and also provides technical assistance and grants to the network of community-based partners that support purchases using DC's TOPA law. And as we also drew on the experiences of San Francisco, which more recently passed a COPA policy in 2019, and where our Bay Area office and their partners have been really active in helping design local preservation programs and passing policies like COPA. So just by way, I guess, of a little bit of context, sort of nationally, though our report is focused on DC and TOPA, DC and San Francisco, and sort of lessons we can draw from those two cities, just really important to note that these policies have gained a lot of attention nationally, really as tools to help level the playing field against, escalating investor acquisition and private equity acquisition of housing, and also as ways to help improve housing quality and affordability, and promote resident and community decision-making over the future of their buildings, at the moment of sale, which can often be a very destabilizing moment for renters. And though the various policies, TOPA, COPA, rights of first refusal, they go by many names, can differ on some of the specifics. Essentially what we're talking about is giving tenants, in the case of TOPA, or qualified housing nonprofits, in the case of COPA, a chance to buy a multifamily building when the owner decides to sell, and also the opportunity to match, a third-party offer. So along with DC and San Francisco, there's at least 7 other jurisdictions. A number of them are in Maryland that have similar kinds of laws for unsubsidized rental housing, and of course many more jurisdictions in the federal LIHTC program that also have, right of first refusal policies in place for subsidized rental properties that are reaching the end of their affordability period. And some jurisdictions that are exploring, measures to strengthen these kinds of policies as thousands of affordable homes are facing expiring subsidies in the coming years. And also wanted to note, there's similar kinds of initiatives that are really targeting distressed or foreclosed homes, including California's statewide foreclosure intervention and housing preservation program, which was passed 2 years ago, based on advocacy that was really led by community-based groups, community land trusts, tenant organizing groups. And the FIP program, as it's called, is a $500 million investment statewide over 2 years to support nonprofit acquisition of foreclosed single-family homes and multifamily buildings of 1 to 25 units that are at risk of foreclosure. So that program is, the fund's going to be managed by the LISC Bay Area office with a number of other community development lenders around the state participating in both the fund disbursement and technical assistance provision. And this funding was really intended to complement an earlier law that California passed, SB 1079, which prevents, bulk foreclosure sales, which is a real site of a lot of, investor activity, and gives nonprofits a first right of refusal for foreclosed single-family homes after auction. So just wanted to note those efforts as well. So just now to get into, DC and San Francisco and some important local context. So in DC, TOPA was passed in 1980, during a very different time in the district's history in the context of a lot of disinvestment and decline, where there was a lot of active, tenant and community organizing for housing justice. And the original TOPA law has 3 goals. It's preventing displacement of low-income renters, preserving affordability in the district, and building tenant power by encouraging the formation of tenant associations. So the way it works is that multifamily building owners have to notify tenants when they put their buildings up for sale or enter a sales contract with a third-party buyer. And then tenants can request relevant information, and they have 45 days to organize a tenant association and register their interest in purchasing. And then after registering, tenants have about 4 months to negotiate a contract with the landlord, match the terms of a third-party offer, and then another 4 months to secure acquisition financing. Those timelines can be extended in specific circumstances. There's a number of local financing programs available to support tenants and community-based partners through the purchase process. And most of those programs were actually stood up over the years after the original TOPA policy was passed. A couple of the active current programs now include the district's Housing Production Trust Fund, which is funded at around $100 million a year, which is actually one of the largest allocations in the country. It supports both new production and preservation, and then also the district's Affordable Housing Preservation Fund, which was launched in 2018 and is managed by LISC DC, as well as Capital Impact Partners. So that's both public money and then additional private capital that the CDFIs help to raise. So in contrast to DC, where in San Francisco, COPA was passed, in this supercharged housing market of Bay Area real estate in 2019, after over a decade of advocacy and organizing that actually first focused on standing up a preservation program for the small buildings that were most at risk of losing affordability, and also investments in a capacity building fund for community development corporations to kind of build their own preservation, like acquisition rehab sort of muscles on these kinds of projects. And the way that San Francisco's COPA works is that it gives qualified nonprofit buyers both a right of first offer and a right of first refusal for multifamily buildings with 3 or more units, and actually also for vacant lots that are zoned for 3 or more units. So basically, the right of first offer means that actually before they even put their buildings on the market, property owners have to notify qualified nonprofits who then have 5 days to express their initial interest in buying the building, and then another 25 days to put together an offer. And if their offer is rejected by the seller, qualified nonprofits still have a right of first refusal sort of on the back end of things, so they can match that offer. And that actually provides nonprofit buyers with really critical leverage through the purchase process. So the timeline is quite a bit shorter potentially than DC's TOPA timeline, though things can, sometimes get extended once qualified nonprofits are in contract on a property. So that's just sort of an overview of how they work. In terms of the impacts of both policies, this slide just gives you a sense kind of by the numbers of what that has done. And really is just illustrating that both of these are very, workable and very impactful policies that can be implemented, have been implemented even in, really hot markets to strengthen local housing preservation programs. So TOPA has helped form, hundreds of tenant associations and preserved over 16,000 units of affordable housing just since 2006, let alone, that's kind of as far back as the data goes that the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development could find. So over 16,000 units preserved and nearly 15,000 apartments that received repairs or renovations through exercising TOPA rights, which is actually around 12% of all rental units in the district that have been upgraded as a result of tenants being able to negotiate with landlords. So whether they decide to stay as rentals with a different new owner in place or buy their buildings together as a cooperative, TOPA is providing really, really important rights and leverage to improve living conditions and affordability for tenants who are overwhelmingly choosing to invest in those kinds of protections, in contrast to what we see from a lot of investor owners, especially the larger institutional investors that often raise rents, evict tenants, and neglect repairs at higher rates than other kinds of owners. And also really important to note that TOPA has helped create the vast majority of DC's affordable cooperative apartments, so has provided a pathway to affordable ownership for tenants, especially in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, COPA, which has really focused on smaller buildings, again, COPA, the local small sites preservation finance program, which San Francisco stood up, is really focused on smaller buildings. And so since 2019, COPA has preserved 230 units of permanently affordable housing, because permanent affordability is actually a requirement with San Francisco's COPA policy. And has just also really helped to kind of level the playing field for nonprofit purchasers and brought a lot of additional transparency in terms of what is moving in the multifamily market. previously to COPA, buildings would often change hands without ever even going onto the multiple listing services. So community-based nonprofits, tenants, nobody had any idea that the building was ever up for sale until after it sold. And so COPA really changes that, because everyone now, any multifamily building has to at least, notify qualified nonprofits that they're putting the building up for sale. So they have that time frame to express interest in purchase. So just to kind of sum up, key lessons, key findings. One thing that's really clear is the need for workable timeframes for tenant or community acquisition, and this has to be paired with resources for tenant organizing and legal assistance, and rapid, fast, flexible acquisition financing, as well as, underwriters, whether they're based at a city agency or at a local, CDFI, or both, both San Francisco and DC have both kind of a city managed fund and a CDFI managed fund to support these kinds of acquisitions. The ability to underwrite quickly, to be able to compete with these sort of market timelines is a really important piece of, having a workable, relatively fast COPA and TOPA timeline. There's also a need for long-term support for building management and sustainability, supporting nonprofit partners, supporting tenant, new, co-op owners through the process, not just of buying their building, but then continuing to manage it well over the long term. And just really the need for broader investments in local housing preservation, like the entire ecosystem of supportive partners, of legal and TA providers, of tenant organizers, in addition to that fast, flexible capital. And so I think there's an important point here in that, in DC, that ecosystem sort of grew up and has been sustained after TOPA was passed. And in San Francisco, is sort of the opposite, right? Like the ecosystem was really grown first, and then that helped pave the way for the passage of COPA, actually unanimously, some years later. And so there's still, whether or not TOPA and COPA as a piece of legislation is something that is imminently passable, there's still a lot to be done in terms of strengthening that local preservation infrastructure in ways that can then, help facilitate later passage, and help lead to better, some of these similar kinds of outcomes in terms of preserving quality, affordable housing, and supporting tenant organizing. And LISC had actually done some research that, found that the kinds of preservation investments of acquisition subsidy that are paired with COPA and TOPA really do improve quality of life for tenants. So in New York, found that maintenance violations decreased by threefold as through this kind of affordable subsidy, as compared with speculative kinds of building purchases. And I think the experience of DC really bears that out, just by seeing just how many tenants were able to negotiate improvements to their buildings through TOPA and COPA. So it's really important to underscore that piece of things. And then we just wrap up with some recommendations that come out of both sites, I think kind of reinforcing what I just said around the financing, the organizing and capacity building, the collaborative policy and program design process, which is a really key part of San Francisco's work of working very closely with tenant groups, with CDCs, with other community-based partners in designing the finance programs and designing the policy, and then being able to ensure that you're establishing some kind of system for monitoring the impact over time. And then I think just to wrap up, I want to note that current market conditions in a lot of places are especially ripe for preservation strategies. Not only is there an overwhelming need to preserve the affordable housing we already have, but also, the combination of sort of higher interest rates, rising costs for multifamily landlords, many of whom are in need of refinancing, provide a relatively cost-efficient opportunity to invest in and preserve needed affordability. So it's a really it's a really critical moment, I should say, to take these steps to support local preservation infrastructure. So I think I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take any questions after Lukas's presentation.
Great. Well, Julia, I think we do have a couple of questions, so I'm gonna give those to you, and then we'll turn it to Lukas. And I just want to say thanks for just sharing that overview of policies, because we speak regularly, frequently around the value of policies in terms of preserving affordable housing. So thank you for that, and showing that it's working. Those are really important two pieces. So one of the questions we have is from Jane Pavick. How has LISC or rural LISC implemented these programs in smaller cities or rural areas?
That's a really good question. I I know that there's a couple, so among the jurisdictions in Maryland that have adopted right of first refusal policies, there's a few that allow it for single family homes, including in Baltimore and in Tacoma Park. So it kind of works as like the owner first has to offer it to the current tenant, who then in Baltimore, it's about 2 weeks. I can't remember the exact timeline for Tacoma Park, but it can also be paired with, down payment assistance programs and other forms of support to help support folks in moving into homeownership. So that's potentially a good model to look at for smaller cities, for rural areas where the housing stock is, potentially you're looking at more single family homes. Also, a number of states have similar kinds of right of first refusal policies for manufactured home parks, which is a really important source of affordable, sort of unsubsidized affordable housing in a lot of rural areas. So folks who live in the park, who own their home but pay lot rent, are able to match an outside buyer's offer to buy the park. So then they can own the land cooperatively together and then still own the home on top of the park. And it can really help counter what has also become a real focus for private equity and investor activity into manufactured housing. And LISC Rural works with ROC USA, Resident Owned Communities USA, which is a lender and TA provider that helps manufactured home residents who are interested in that model to buy their parks together.
Thank you. Wonderful examples. Because you hear all the time of big cities, and it's sometimes hard to figure out how you can make these programs work in smaller cities and rural markets. But it sounds like it's happening. So thanks so much for that, Julia. Well, Lukas, we're going to turn it over to you to share information about the Utah Housing Preservation Fund.
Great. Thank you so much. Here, give me 1 second. I'll get these slides up in front of us. Well, thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to kind of talk about our preservation fund. I appreciate the kind things that Joselyn has already, primed you guys for about the fund. So that's great. And Julia, I learned actually a ton in that presentation. There's a lot of things that are happening that I didn't know were happening. And that's exciting and great. And it makes me want to see if we can bring some of those policies, at least in some shape or form, to Utah or Nevada, some of our states that don't have those yet. But I'll talk a little bit about the Utah Housing Preservation Fund. The Utah Housing Preservation Fund sits underneath Utah Nonprofit Housing Corporation. So it's inside of a nonprofit. And the fund itself was started in 2020. The reason the fund was started was kind of actually originally just kind of a private interest groups that cared about the state of Utah and saw the trend of the loss of our affordable housing. And what was seen was really not just the low-income housing tax credit properties or the other subsidized properties that were coming to the end of a restriction and then being lost, but it was also the naturally occurring affordable housing that would, it never really showed up on a database. It didn't get noticed maybe as much, but it was there and it would just get lost by private equity investment. And there's no protection for those, not even at least a timeline of when they expire from a deed restriction or something like that. And so, I'll kind of just highlight out through this. I don't need to touch too much on the problem with this group. You guys know the problem of affordable housing. Huge affordable housing shortages with increased prices, and that is housing prices for sale homes as well as for rentals. Increased rental rates. With increased construction costs and sometimes slower timelines, especially due to economics like higher interest rates right now. A lot of those developments that maybe were in progress or at least were going to be built just completely stopped right now. The faucet is off for the moment. And then, the piece that I really like to highlight and touch on is the loss of our affordable housing. That's the piece that I think that preservation, obviously that's what we're trying to solve. That's what we're trying to really put the magnifying glass to. Sometimes I don't think people realize how important and impactful preservation investment can be, though. And so I'll get into that a little bit further, but I want to highlight out the flip side of that is, you might think, yeah, we lose preservation, some housing in the that's preserved already, or it gets lost to the market because its deed restriction comes off, but we replace it with another one, well, it still really is disruptive for our communities. It's really disruptive for those tenants that live there. And a lot of times it's so much more costly to build more. And I'll kind of jump into that too. We always, at the fund, we always like to picture it as a bucket of water. And, there's a hole in the bottom. Inside the water is the affordable housing. And we're just pouring some in the top while it's spilling out the bottom. And we might be getting a little bit here and there. We might be losing a little extra here and there, depending on how fast the faucet's going. But at the end of the day, we're losing it, and we need to plug that hole as much as we can. I don't think probably won't get to a point where it's completely sealed, but if we can seal it up as much as we can, it makes a huge impact. And so our priority is to really plug the leaky bucket of affordable housing. And the fund itself, I'll get into some of the details. We're designed to be able to compete and beat the market if we can, just as competitive as those. In Utah, we don't have an awesome program like COPA or TOPA that would help a nonprofit group get the edge, or at least be able to match an offer. So what it comes down to is we need to be able to act quick and be quick as cash, work just like all the other nonprofit the private equity groups that are in there competing to make these properties that are affordable, into higher rent, unaffordable properties. And then we really want to maximize their impact, build amazing partnerships. I want to talk about the impact piece real quick. And this is just to highlight some of the amazing things that preservation can do. So if you're going to go preserve affordable housing, depending on where you are, depending on your market, this is kind of roughly based on the Utah market. But we can go purchase affordable housing, maybe naturally occurring affordable housing units at somewhere between $165,000 to $225,000 in Salt Lake County per door. Okay. It'll take a little bit of time to purchase it, but we're actually pretty quick. We're able to do that within 3 months. Maybe if you're a group that needs some longer timelines, maybe it's 6 months. So that's acquisition to preserve the affordable housing. And then there's dollars that go into some improvement. And sometimes that's actually all in cost there, even for the improvements. But if you're going to go for new development, and I know that there's great programs that are subsidizing a lot of this, but realistically, if you're going for new development, the cost is anywhere from $250,000 to $350,000 plus per unit that's developed, typically. And a lot of times that affordable housing will take 3 to 5 years to develop. Maybe it's a little less here and there, but when it comes down to development, for the planning, for the entitlements and the whole process, you're looking at a pretty long timeline. And so preservation really is able to kind of act quickly and make a bigger impact with less dollars than a lot of new development. And that's not to discount new development, because they're absolutely needed. Our need for affordable housing is not staying the same. It's actually growing. And so this is so important to look at both sides, but we need both. We've looked a lot at new development, and we need more preservation. The fund itself, we preserve affordable housing, whether it's naturally occurring affordable housing with no deed restrictions, or we'll look at things like the National Housing Preservation Database for Utah and try to understand where are those expiring low-income housing tax credit units or other subsidy units that aren't going to be renewed at the end of their timeline. Where are those properties? How can we get in contact with owners and purchase them right before the restrictions come off, or at least purchase them as they're coming off, so that we can put our own deed restrictions in and keep those units affordable in the long term. We upgrade the units. We don't look to do a value add, investor upgrade and put in nice countertops. We do want to make the unit nice, safe, comfortable place to live, where people can live their life and have a balance between rent and other things that are going on and not have that burden. We provide, housing for some of the more, anywhere from 30% of the area median income all the way up to 80 to 100% of the area median income. Typically, most of our properties are 80% or below. And so, 30 to 80 is kind of our bread and butter as a fund. But that's kind of what we look to do. And then we try to build community partnerships with the local nonprofits. They're there, they exist. They just need somebody, to kind of bring them together so we can bring services for our tenants that might need them, and help build community, really. So our fund, I don't have our newest property on here, but we have purchased 10 properties. I'll highlight that maybe a little later. I know this isn't as relevant because Utah is not as familiar as Nevada as to this group. But really, this is kind of how the fund has been structured, is to be able to target various income groups throughout our properties. So like I mentioned, 30 to 80%. What really sets the fund apart is we are a public-private partnership, and we chose to be a public-private partnership because we wanted to create a model that would be evergreen, a model that would be lasting and not kick the can of affordable housing down the road. And what we mean by that is when we looked and did some research before the fund was initially started, many of the housing preservation groups typically do an investment for 7 to 10 years, 5 to 10 years. But there's a timeline on it because they need to sell those properties and then recoup some investment and then go do that again somewhere else. And while it does extend the life of it, we thought that maybe that was the biggest issue of we're still losing that affordable housing. It's just when. And so our model partnered with the state of Utah to receive some dollars from there and match it with private dollars and take those together so that we don't have to sell our properties. We can continue to let these properties almost be kind of a revolving investment in affordable housing and continue to maintain those properties in the long term. And it's been great so far. And then, as part of a partnership with the state of Utah, we knew that while urban areas face the preservation issue more acutely, typically, a lot of the rural areas will be facing it too as growth happens, and getting ahead of the curve is much more effective than trying to do it after the prices have risen. And so we have also focused a portion of our investment on rural properties. And so far, we're actually right at that ratio of 70-30. 7 of our investments are in rural area or urban areas, and 3 of them are in rural areas. And this is kind of the impact that really we've been able to make. And I'll kind of highlight out some of the pieces that go into this. But right now, each of our tenants save about on $5,000 a year on average in rent savings that otherwise would have just it's, if you think about it, it's after their taxes, after everything else, they're paying that out of their pocket. And if your tenant makes $50,000 a year, you're looking at 10% of their income is saved. Awesome, really great. 1,700 tenants live in our units right now. And total, and because we're an evergreen fund, we save about $3.2 million for all of our tenants annually. And so that'll continue to grow as the fund increases and grows. We've also, have some things that we wanted to target groups that are specifically vulnerable and need that stable housing. So we've targeted some refugees that have come to Utah. We've targeted veterans. We've targeted some of the homeless families that need rapid rehousing that have just recently fallen into a tough situation. And right now we're at 768 units. Overall, we're right around 50% area median income that we serve. And so awesome. We're really excited about it. It makes a big impact. Some of our cool partners that we've worked with to try to help grow, we can work with a lot of nonprofits. We are flexible. We can try to learn and grow and be as impactful as possible. So we work with local nonprofits. We work with groups like Isuzu that helps your tenants hopefully have a better economic trajectory and increase their credit scores as they pay their rent. So really cool partnerships that we can kind of do. And the fund, this is a little bit outdated, but we've raised about $168 million so far, partially from the state, partially from banks here in Utah. So that's the CRA banks. And then partially from program-related investors, which are typically foundations or social impact investors that are giving so that they do receive a small return, 4% return. And it's almost structured like a bond, 4% every year. But that's the way we can get the scale of capital to come into the fund. They get a small return for social impact. They care about the social impact, but we get to scale this thing and be able to make a long-term impact. And because our mission, all the dollars that are extra from that get recycled back into investment into affordable housing. So really great there. And here's kind of another look at our capital stack of how the fund has been structured. So between philanthropic donations and grants, that's from the state of Utah, mostly some of the foundations have given some grants as well, program-related investment and social impact investors, another portion of our capital stack. And we're raising toward this goal of $250 million. And then that will be leveraged even further with some of the debt that we can get on our properties and make a bigger, more widespread impact throughout Utah. I know I'm going maybe slightly over on the time, but I'll quickly maybe highlight one of these, and then Joselyn, you can tell me if you want me to go on to another example, or I can jump, we can jump into some Q&A. But I'll highlight, let's see, we'll do this one, Victory at Summit. So Victory at Summit is what we would call one of our rural investments. However, it is rural, but pretty close to an urban center. It's right outside of Park City, as many of you guys know, a very big ski town, very, well-off area. But what they struggle with is everything is so unaffordable in the area. They don't have housing for the workers that actually are trying to work and help sustain their community because it's so expensive. This represented 14% of their affordable housing stock in the whole county. And they were about to just lose it because the restrictions came off and they were going to sell it to the market. Our nonprofit parent company looked at it to see if they could do a tax credit deal on it, but it just wouldn't make sense because of they couldn't get certain credits to make it work. And so this property, another group would have had the same struggle. This property would have just gone to the market and been lost. The rents would have increased dramatically because the rents delta in that area was almost $1,000 for any of those units to increase. But we were able to come in here and preserve this property, purchase it, keep it, keep the quality of living nice, improve some of that because it's been neglected as a low-income housing tax credit property for some of the deferred maintenance, and really be serving the tenants. And this property serves anywhere from 50 to 70% of the area median income over in Summit County. And so huge success story, really excited about it. And it's kind of one of our bread and butter investment ideas of what we do, expiring low-income housing tax credit. But Jocelyn, I'll let you jump in. If you want me to share a couple more examples, happy to, or if we want to jump into Q&A, I'm happy to do that.
We have a couple of questions, Lucas, so let's do that. So thank you so much for sharing information. Two really key takeaways is partnerships are important. And I think I heard that from both speakers. And then preservation is less expensive than production, but the capital stack is really important. And again, just bringing the right partners and players together. One question that we have, Lucas, is, and I think probably of interest to everyone on the line is, can you tell us how the Preservation Fund started and how it could be replicated in Nevada?
Yes, absolutely. So the genesis of the Preservation Fund really started from a social impact investor. So it came from the private party. It was from Clark Ivory has a foundation here in Utah. He's one of the largest residential home builders, building mostly single family homes. But he has a foundation here to help housing, help a lot of other things. And one of the things he was trying to do is purchase a portfolio that had come to the market of a naturally occurring affordable housing. And it was in probate. And so he put an offer in, and they tentatively accepted his offer. He thought he had this property going to be wrapped up and he was going to keep it affordable, preserve it in his foundation, and pretty much do this strategy of housing preservation without some of the, the sophistication that we've grown into now. And then in the last second, a group from California that had to place money quickly for a 1031 exchange came in and placed a dramatically higher offer, purchased it out from underneath him. And instead of doing preservation, they did value add, right? And so all those tenants were displaced. He watched it happen. He said, these are all downtown areas that almost can't be replaced. And it's going to dramatically change the landscape of affordable housing here in downtown Salt Lake. And we need to make sure that there's something that can be done about this. And he's like, it doesn't look like there is. And so he rounded up a handful of partners. And a lot of them are anchor institutes here in Utah. So Zions Bank is the largest regional bank here. And they got involved. Intermountain Healthcare is the largest healthcare group here. They're a nonprofit as well, and they got involved. And so together, those three kind of created the idea of this preservation fund that could be housed underneath the largest nonprofit developer here of affordable housing, Utah Nonprofit, and kind of create this public-private partnership. And so really it came from anchor partners. And that's kind of how the ideas got going. My suggestion, if you're going to start one in your own community, and I think that this is a model that can scale and be in every state, is you kind of need to have this united collaboration, but probably see who might be one of those bigger supporters that can, be willing to put out some seed investment into a fund and structure it like this, and work with the city or the state, because at the end of the day, the longevity and the success of the fund, what really sets it apart is the collaboration between partners. And really that's the public and private to make this longevity happen. And so I think that it's all about finding the right anchor partner, and maybe an anchor nonprofit group that already has some experience. It looks like Julia has done some things interesting in DC with their LISC, affordable housing. And I don't know all the details of that. I'd love to learn more about that, but maybe it's something like that, having a group that manages a fund for your state or your area to actually make that impact with those anchor partners. So I think those are the three pieces. It's kind of just, you start with the identification of who might be willing to be an anchor partner, and then go from there.
Thank you for that. And what I'm hearing from both of you is the need for cross-sector partners, even as it relates to advocating for policy, providing funds to start an affordable housing fund, as well as, just advocating for tenant rights, right? I mean, and so I think, and from what I'm hearing and reading and from both of you, the partners that you all have brought to the table, we have those partners here in Nevada. So in answer to that question, I think that's one of the next steps, is just really, to your point, Lukas, finding the right partners, bringing them to the table to implement some of these best practices that both of you have brought up and shared with us today. One other quick question for you, Lukas, is, and this is definitely an important, what are the benefits to owners to sell to your organization versus an independent investor group? Right? This is around expiring tax credits.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a little bit tough out there. I won't say that there's this massive benefit typically to the owner, besides the fact that we can be pretty competitive with other groups, right? A lot of times what we find is, if we are finding market opportunities that maybe isn't fully widely marketed to everyone, we have most success there. Even in those marketed opportunities, we can be pretty competitive in our underwriting and how we can make that property function. However, a lot of times, we lose out on a lot of deals, I guess is what I'll tell you. We offer a lot, we look at a lot of opportunities, and we do still lose out on these opportunities. What's been really successful is local owners tend to prefer to sell to a group that's not going to displace their tenants. Owners that have a choice between two pretty competitive offers typically will choose ours if there's a more of a nonprofit spin to it, and an actual impact spin. And the other side is, we have this fund that's already been fundraised. We are a really solid investor. We have really solid surety to close. We're known across Utah now that we are a great buyer. And in some situations, we will purchase properties in cash and then choose to refinance later. And so we have strong enough backing that we can do some of those things that helps at least set us apart as a group. And so depending on the investor or the seller, kind of depends on maybe what we can lean on, but we try to lean toward people's desire to do good, as well as sometimes it's the terms that set us apart from other groups.
Yeah, and I'll just say too,
Yes.
in San Francisco, part of one of the incentives that they passed along with COPA is a partial transfer tax exemption for owners who do sell to qualified nonprofits. So it's not like a huge tax benefit or anything, but it's a little bit of a deal sweetener that they added there. And also, I think having a right of first refusal does help strengthen the position of nonprofit purchasers in this kind of, all other things being equal, like if you're getting the same price for the property, whether it's a institutional investor or a community-based nonprofit, like having that right of first refusal means that like they'd have to take the community-based nonprofit offer instead of the institutional investor offer, because it's the same price that the owner is getting. So just another way to think about how those kinds of policy tools can help. The other pieces are in place, like the financing is really critical. Being able to underwrite quickly and like bring the money to the table at the moment that it's needed is absolutely essential. And then these other tools are ways to, provide that additional kind of leverage to preservation buyers.
Great, thank you for that. No, that's really important to highlight. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I think if you guys can both jump in on this, because this is something that I hear about an idea that folks do float. And so have your organizations considered conversion or adaptive reuse options for creating housing from office or hotel or commercial stock or space? I mean, we see that all the time, right? I mean, there's so much commercial space vacant. Are you all seeing any of that being used for additional affordable housing? Either one can jump in.
I can jump in really quickly. We have considered it. One of the biggest things that is a little difficult is in urban areas, there's plenty of housing stock. You see plenty of housing stock that's either naturally occurring or expiring low-income housing tax credit or other subsidy housing, and that gives us a lot of opportunities to purchase those. But when you look into rural areas in Utah, and I'm sure in Nevada, a very similar landscape, you don't see a ton of dense housing anywhere. And if it's dense, maybe dense to them is a fourplex. And really for operational success for the fund, and as we look across different areas, it's not super easy to do a spread out portfolio of small little properties. It's much more effective for us to provide better housing to more consolidated location. So when we're looking at rural investment, we have considered doing a lot of hotel or motel conversions to affordable housing so that we can at least serve those communities. And a lot of these need capital infusion anyways. They're older and they maybe are not even that used in their community. And so we've looked at some of those opportunities. The fund itself has chosen to stick mostly to acquisition and medium rehab, I would say. So not stripping down to the bone, redevelopment type feel, but much more like, let's do a lift to the units. If we need to do some fixes for older plumbing and other things, we totally do it. But we haven't, done a to the studs rehab. So we kind of have this balance. We haven't looked into office yet, but maybe that's the next step.
Thank you for that. And I think Joanna's given me the look. So I want to say thank you so much, Julia and Lukas, for joining us today, sharing some best practices and really giving us some ideas here in Nevada about some of those things that we can do here to increase the amount of access to quality, safe, and affordable housing to our community. So again, thank you so much. And I'll turn it back to you, Joanna.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Lukas and Julia. And thank you, Joselyn, for helping put this together and moderating this amazing discussion. I can tell by how many questions haven't got answered and that we're 10 minutes over that this is a very popular topic and a topic of interest, which is my dream and what I hope would come out of this preservation lunch and learn. So definitely this is just the beginning of the conversation. Feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat before we sign off if you have any leftover burning questions or if I can help connect you to any of the resources. But we do send out the slides and the recording to everybody who's registered for the Lunch and Learn. And thank you for staying extra long with us. We had a really great live audience today. And next month, we'll be talking about LIHTC with the Reuben Brown crowd. So please join us again and everybody have a great day.